They denied my bonus in a room full of glass and smiles, like it was a minor administrative correction instead of a declaration of how little they thought I mattered. The CFO cleared his throat and slid a spreadsheet across the table, explaining margins, optics, precedent, words people use when they want to sound fair while doing something calculated. I had just closed the largest enterprise deal in the company's history, a deal that took 14 months, 3 countries, and more red-eye flights than I could count. The number at the bottom of that contract had commas that made the board clap. My bonus, the one promised in writing, vanished with a single sentence. The company has decided to reinvest your portion elsewhere. They waited for me to argue. I didn't. I nodded once, thanked them for their transparency, and felt something click into place that had been tightening for years. What they never understood was that I wasn't just a sales lead or a fixer they could squeeze harder every quarter. I was the connective tissue. Over a decade, I had quietly accumulated responsibility because I solved problems no one else could or wanted to touch. I designed the partner escalation process. I negotiated the reseller side letters that kept lawsuits from happening. I knew which clauses in which contracts would collapse if delivery slipped by a week. Legal came to me before they went to outside counsel. Ops waited for my green light before committing capacity. None of this was on my job description, which is exactly why it worked. Power doesn't announce itself in org charts. It hides in dependency. So when they denied my bonus, I stopped doing what I'd been doing for free. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't burn bridges or take files. I simply followed my contract to the letter. I stopped answering messages after hours. I redirected partner questions to the official inbox. I refused to just jump on a quick call without a formal request. Within days, things slowed. Within weeks, they snarled. Deals stalled because a minor clause hadn't been smoothed. A strategic partner froze shipments waiting for clarification I used to give in 5 minutes. Legal billed an extra 6 figures trying to recreate institutional memory I carried in my head. The CFO noticed the burn rate before he noticed me. The real shift came when I resigned, calmly, professionally, with notice. That's when the scramble began. They offered to revisit the bonus, then to exceed it, then to create a new role. I declined each one without anger. I had already accepted an offer from a competitor who didn't need convincing because they'd watched the cracks appear in real time. On my last day, I handed over clean documentation, nothing proprietary beyond what I was obligated to share. What I took with me was more valuable and completely legal: relationships, trust, and the understanding of how the market actually moved. 3 months later, their biggest account followed me. Then another. Then a partner terminated exclusivity, citing strategic realignment. The board called it unfortunate timing. The CFO quietly left. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I built. The irony is that denying my bonus saved them a few $100,000 that quarter and cost them everything that made the numbers possible. When people ask why I walked away, I tell them the truth. I didn't leave because of the money. I left because they showed me exactly what I was worth to them. And once you know that, the smartest move is to take your value somewhere that knows how to keep it. They denied my bonus in a room full of glass walls and polite smiles, like stripping something from me would somehow be quieter if the sunlight was bright enough. The number was already on the spreadsheet: earned, approved, justified. But the CFO slid his laptop shut and said, "We're going to need you to be a team player this year." I remember the way my name badge felt heavier on my chest as I looked around the table, at people I'd trained, systems I'd designed, strategies I'd rescued at 2 a.m., and realized that this wasn't about money at all. It was about control. They thought if they took the reward, I'd keep doing the work anyway. I nodded, thanked them for their time, and walked back to my desk while they congratulated themselves on saving the company a 6-figure payout. What they didn't understand was that my value had never been the hours I logged. It was the quiet architecture behind the operation. For 12 years, I'd been the one smoothing acquisitions, rewriting vendor contracts before lawyers got involved, maintaining the undocumented processes that kept revenue flowing when dashboards went red. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. I was the person everyone forwarded problems to when something mysteriously stopped working. So when I stopped volunteering, stopped answering after hours messages, stopped fixing things before they broke, the cracks didn't appear all at once. They spread slowly, invisibly, like stress fractures beneath polished marble. By the second quarter, teams were escalating issues that used to disappear overnight. Vendors began charging penalty rates because clauses I'd negotiated were no longer being enforced. A compliance audit stalled because no one knew where the legacy documentation lived or why it mattered. I watched calmly from my seat, performing exactly the role outlined in my job description and nothing more. Every out-of-scope request was met with a polite email and a ticket number. Every shortcut they used to rely on now required approvals, meetings, and weeks of delay. No sabotage, no dramatics, just absence. The turning point came when leadership finally noticed that profitability was sliding despite record sales. Consultants were brought in, expensive ones, who asked questions I could have answered in 10 minutes. I was invited to a quick sync with executives who suddenly remembered my name. They talked about incentives, future opportunities, maybe revisiting the bonus discussion. I listened, smiled, and told them I appreciated the offer, but I'd already accepted another position. One where my contributions were recognized up front, in writing, and without conditions attached. My last day was quiet. I handed over my laptop, my badge, and a meticulously documented transition folder that showed just how much had been resting on informal knowledge and goodwill. The silence that followed wasn't satisfaction, it was clarity. They hadn't lost an employee. They'd lost leverage, efficiency, and years of institutional memory they assumed would always be free. I walked out with my dignity, my expertise, and my future intact, while they were left relearning an expensive lesson. When you deny people what they've earned, you don't just save money. You reveal exactly how much they were worth. The denial came in an email sent at 8:07 a.m., 3 lines long, templated, and signed with my boss's initials like a rubber stamp. After delivering the highest margin quarter the division had seen in a decade, after salvaging contracts everyone else had written off, after quietly fixing disasters that would have sunk careers, they told me my bonus was being reallocated to align with leadership priorities. I sat at my desk staring at the screen while the office buzzed around me, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, people who had no idea they were standing on a floor I'd reinforced for years without credit. I didn't feel angry. I felt something colder, something that only comes when you realize you finally understand the rules of the game, and you're done playing it their way. I'd learned early on that loyalty in corporate life is treated like a renewable resource. Extract it until it's gone, then blame the employee for running dry. For years, I'd been the quiet solution. I didn't need applause, didn't need my name on slides. I built processes no one questioned because they worked too well. I negotiated supplier terms so airtight no one bothered rereading them. I structured projects so dependencies pointed back to me without ever advertising it. Not out of malice, out of professionalism. I believed value would eventually be recognized. The bonus denial finally clarified what recognition really meant to them, silence and compliance. So I stopped both. I didn't storm out. I didn't threaten. I didn't even reply to the email. I simply began doing exactly what my job description said, and nothing more. No late-night saves. No quick look at issues outside my scope. No smoothing over leadership mistakes before they reached the board. The cracks appeared faster than anyone expected. A vendor invoked a clause only I remembered negotiating, freezing deliveries until a sign-off no one else was authorized to give. A licensing agreement hit a renewal trigger that tripled costs without a renegotiation window. Meetings multiplied, voices got sharper, and my calendar, once packed, emptied completely. They thought I was sulking. They didn't realize I was detaching. The real leverage wasn't technical or legal. It was institutional memory. I was the only person who knew why certain decisions had been made, which shortcuts were safe, which ones would collapse under pressure. When I finally submitted my resignation, polite, brief, effective immediately, the panic was immediate. My boss called within minutes, then her boss. HR wanted an exit interview. Finance wanted documentation. Legal wanted reassurance. I gave them none of it. Everything I'd built was theirs, as promised. Everything I knew left with me. Within weeks, the company began hemorrhaging money in ways that couldn't be traced to a single failure. Margins eroded. Timelines slipped. Deals quietly died. I didn't sabotage a thing. I simply stopped being the invisible glue holding it together. Meanwhile, I took calls from competitors who had watched my work from a distance and understood exactly what I was worth. When I accepted a new role, the compensation package included a signing bonus larger than the one I'd been denied, plus equity, plus something I hadn't had in years: respect. Months later, I ran into my former boss at an industry event. She looked tired, smaller. We exchanged polite smiles. She congratulated me on my new position and joked about how things really changed after I left. I nodded, sipped my drink, and said nothing. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. They denied my bonus because they thought I'd stay anyway. They were wrong. They told me the bonus pool was tight this year in the same breath they used to congratulate themselves on a record quarter. I remember the glass conference room, the way my reflection doubled in the windows behind them, like even the building knew I was being split in two. 12 years of late nights, salvaged contracts, and quiet fixes no one ever documented, and suddenly my contribution was a line item they could zero out. I nodded while they spoke, because nodding is what you do when you finally understand the rules of the game you've been playing blind. I thanked them for the feedback. I shook hands. And I walked back to my desk already gone. What they never realized was that my value wasn't in my title or my salary band. It was in the connective tissue of the business. I was the one clients called when things went wrong, the one vendors trusted because I never burned them, the one who knew which clauses were flexible and which were landmines. I didn't own anything on paper, but I owned relationships, processes, and a memory no CRM could replace. So when I stopped staying late, stopped smoothing over internal chaos, stopped answering calls that weren't officially my responsibility, the machine didn't break immediately. It just started to drift, slow and subtle, like a ship that had lost its compass but not yet its speed. Weeks passed. Deadlines slipped. A renewal that should have been automatic turned into a negotiation. A partner asked for assurances no one else knew how to give. My calendar was suddenly empty, and theirs was filling with meetings that went nowhere. That's when I handed in my notice, polite, professional, 2 weeks offered out of courtesy, not obligation. Panic followed me down the hallway like a draft of cold air. They tried to counter with words first, then numbers. I listened because listening costs nothing. But the bonus they denied me wasn't about money anymore. It was about acknowledgement, and that window had already closed. I walked out on a Friday with a clean inbox and a lighter step, and by Monday morning my phone was lighting up with unfamiliar numbers. Clients wanted to know where I'd gone. Vendors asked who they should talk to now. I answered honestly, I'd moved on. What I didn't say was that I hadn't taken anything that wasn't mine. I just took my time, my judgment, and my willingness to care. Within a month, the company announced a strategic restructuring. Within 3, the executive who denied my bonus quietly exited. And me? I landed on my feet, consulting on my terms, paid for what I knew instead of what they thought I was worth. They denied my bonus thinking it would keep me in line. Instead, it showed me the door, and I walked away with everything that mattered. They told me it was a timing issue, which is corporate language for "we're hoping you'll forget." I was sitting in the same glass-walled conference room where I'd closed 7-figure deals, watching my reflection ghost across the polished table as my manager explained why my bonus, clearly outlined in my contract, was being restructured. The company had posted record profits. The board had toasted leadership at the last town hall. My numbers were untouchable. But somehow, when it came to honoring the one promise that actually mattered, suddenly there were caveats, conditions, and carefully rehearsed apologies. I nodded, took notes, asked calm, professional questions, and inside something clicked into place. What they never understood about me was that I wasn't motivated by loyalty to titles or people. I was loyal to systems, how they worked, where the leverage lived, who depended on what without realizing it. For years, I'd been the connective tissue between departments that barely spoke to each other. I knew which clients required personal reassurance instead of automated emails, which vendors stayed because of trust rather than contracts, which internal processes existed only because I quietly maintained them outside my job description. I'd built redundancies where none existed and smoothed over cracks no one else even saw. And I'd done it because I believed effort would be reciprocated. After that meeting, I stopped doing anything that wasn't explicitly written down. No extra calls, no quick favors, no staying late to rescue a slipping deadline. I delivered exactly what my role required and nothing more. The effect wasn't immediate, it never is. At first, leadership congratulated themselves on setting boundaries. Then emails started slipping through the cracks. Clients asked for me by name. Projects stalled in places no one knew how to fix. Meetings multiplied, but decisions didn't. They were bleeding efficiency and didn't know where the wound was. The real shift came when I gave notice. Not dramatic, 2 weeks, professional tone, gratitude for the opportunity. That's when panic finally broke through the polished calm. HR suddenly wanted to revisit my bonus. My manager asked if we could talk off the record. A director I hadn't spoken to in years asked me to document my workflows urgently. I smiled and declined. Everything I was responsible for was already documented. Everything else. That had been goodwill. On my last day, I walked out with my laptop bag and a quiet sense of relief. Within a month, 2 major clients followed me to my new firm. A third renegotiated their contract citing relationship instability. Costs spiked as consultants were brought in to replace what had once been invisible. The bonus they denied me would have cost them a fraction of what they lost trying to recreate my presence from memory and meeting notes. I didn't take revenge. I took my value with me. And that was everything. They denied my bonus in a glass conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of practice sympathy executives use when they think they're being generous. My manager leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and told me budgets were tight this quarter, that my contributions were valued, and that maybe next year we could revisit expectations. I nodded, smiled even, because I'd learned long ago that anger makes people careless, but silence makes them underestimate you. What he didn't notice was that the spreadsheet on the screen behind him, the one he didn't understand well enough to question, was built on a framework I'd designed from the ground up. Every forecast, every dependency, every automated decision that made the company look brilliant to investors flowed through systems only I truly understood. I went back to my desk and finished the day exactly as I always did, efficient, invisible, indispensable. I answered emails, signed off on approvals, and documented processes with a level of precision that would have impressed auditors. That night, after the office lights dimmed and the cleaning crew started their slow circuit, I saved my final files, logged out, and shut down my machine. No drama, no threats, just a clean exit, because walking away doesn't mean slamming doors, it means taking your leverage with you. By the next week, things started to creak, then groan, then fail. Forecasts that once updated in minutes now took days. Vendor negotiations stalled because no one could explain why pricing models contradicted each other. Meetings multiplied, consultants were hired, and emails with the subject line urgent filled inboxes. My manager called first, then his boss, then HR. They asked for help, offered to reconsider, even hinted at a retroactive bonus. I declined politely. I'd already moved on, contracting independently, charging what my work was actually worth. It took them 3 months and 7 figures in consulting fees to rebuild a pale imitation of what I'd created alone. By then, the board had questions. The bonus pool was gone entirely, and my former manager was suddenly pursuing other opportunities. I heard all of this secondhand, of course, because I was busy billing new clients who didn't confuse loyalty with charity. I never raised my voice. Never broke a rule, never sabotaged a thing. I simply stopped giving away what I'd been told wasn't worth paying for. And in the end, that was the real lesson they learned too late. Denying a bonus is easy. Replacing someone who built everything quietly is not. They denied my bonus in a room full of people who pretended not to notice. The glass-walled conference room overlooked the city, all steel and sunlight and polished confidence. My manager cleared his throat and slid a single-page printout across the table like it was a favor. "Given the market conditions," he said, not meeting my eyes, "leadership has decided bonuses will be deferred." Deferred. A word that sounded temporary but never was. Around him, executives nodded with rehearsed sympathy, the kind you learn in leadership workshops. I sat there, hands folded, listening to them explain how my work had been exceptional, critical, above expectations, and still somehow not worth paying for. Something clicked then, not loudly, quietly, like a lock opening. For 8 years, I'd been the person who fixed what broke after hours. I knew where the undocumented systems lived, which vendors actually mattered, which clients would leave if a single report was late. I wasn't flashy. I was reliable. And reliable people, I'd learned, are often rewarded with more work instead of more money. As they wrapped up the meeting, my manager smiled and said, "We appreciate your commitment." I smiled back, already running through the inventory in my head. Not of assets, of leverage. I didn't quit that day. I didn't storm out or send an emotional email. I went back to my desk and did exactly what my job description said, no more, no less. I stopped patching holes that weren't officially assigned to me. I stopped being the emergency contact. I documented everything meticulously, the way compliance loves but managers hate. When systems failed, I forwarded tickets instead of fixing them quietly. When clients escalated, I included leadership on every reply. The machine they'd been leaning on so comfortably began to creak. 2 weeks later, a senior VP called me into her office. "Things feel slower," she said carefully. "Is everything okay?" I told her everything was working as designed. My contract, after all, didn't include unpaid heroics. She frowned, made a note, and thanked me for my honesty. That afternoon, a recruiter emailed me. Then another. "Turns out when you stop hiding your competence, the market notices." I accepted an offer elsewhere quietly, professionally. No counteroffer came, only surprise. On my last day, I handed over my access badge and watched a line of people realize all at once how much lived only in my head. Projects stalled, clients called. Consultants were hired at triple my salary to recreate systems I'd built and maintained alone. I answered none of the frantic messages. My contract didn't require it anymore. Months later, I ran into my old manager at a conference. He looked tired, thinner. We exchanged pleasantries until he finally said, "Losing you was expensive." I nodded, not smug, just honest. "Bonuses usually are," I replied. They thought denying my bonus would keep me in place. Instead, it clarified my value to myself first and then to everyone else. I didn't walk away with documents or secrets or stolen clients. I walked away with my reputation intact, my time reclaimed, and a career that finally paid what it owed. Sometimes revenge isn't burning bridges or watching things collapse. Sometimes it's simply stepping aside and letting people feel the full cost of what they chose not to value.